SpaceX discloses cause of Starship anomalies as it clears an FAA hurdle. Boeing Starliner will finally fly astronauts this spring, and Space Force to lean on private sector for space tracking data. We're going to review these three fantastic articles today in Space News. My name's Mike. Thanks for watching. Smash that like button and let's just get into it. So SpaceX discloses cause of Starship anomalies as it clears an FAA hurdle. Several engines began shutting down before one engine failed energetically. Curious to find out what energetically means here. So here we have a picture of Starship. It's a bit confusing, is the entire rocket, but also the second stage. So this up here is Starship. This section here with the fins is the interconnect between the second stage and the first stage. And then below that is the first stage with 33 Raptor engines. 3 months after the most recent launch of a Starship vehicle, which ended with both booster and upper stage being lost in flight, the FAA has closed its investigation of the mishap. SpaceX identified that the FAA accepts the root cause and 17 corrective actions documented in SpaceX's mishap report. Prior to the next launch, SpaceX must implement all corrective actions and receive a license modification from the FAA that has addressed all safety, environmental, and other applicable regulatory requirements. This flight on November 18th, so about 4 months ago, as of day of shooting, there were safety, environmental, and other concerns related to the rapid disassembly of this Starship rocket. So what went wrong? In conjunction with Monday's announcement, SpaceX released details for the first time of what happened to cause the November 18th launch to go awry. In this update, SpaceX noted that Super Heavy, which is the first stage, so everything below these fins down here, performed nominally with all 33 Raptor engines on this massive rocket igniting successfully. For reference, the Falcon 9 has 9 engines. Those are those engines referred to again, the Merlin 1D sea level engines, and the Falcon Heavy has 27 Merlin 1D engines, so 9 in the middle and then 9 on in either booster on both sides. At this point, the upper stage so the booster performed nominally. Then it performed a full duration burn to reach stage separation. At this point, the upper stage executed a successful hot staging maneuver in which the Starship stage separated from the booster, while some of the booster's engines were still firing. If you have a double stage rocket and your first stage is still firing, when you disconnect them, the first stage will fire into the second stage, ending your mission very quickly. That would be my understanding. The ideal way to go about this is to get yourself into a position where your first stage is fully expended, turned off, and then you disconnect the two stages, and the second stage will then fire its engines. There's also a consideration to be made for firing your second stage engines after the first stage has somewhat left the area, or else you will be firing your second stage directly into your first stage, therefore causing damage. And these Starships are meant to be fully reusable, so you probably don't want to be throwing a bunch of hot fire at it during flight. It does look like the booster was going to make a series of burns to make a soft landing, so continue its mission in descent down to the Earth. As part of the initial burn, 13 of the rocket's engines were intended to fire, and then there are 20 engines on the ring outside. So during this burn, several engines began shutting down before one engine failed energetically, quickly causing a cascading to a rapid, unscheduled disassembly, or RUD. The vehicle breakup occurred more than 3.5 minutes into the flight at an altitude of 90 kilometers over the Gulf. It meant it blew up. Awesome. All right. Go through some advertisements together. Is this the entire... Okay, there's Starship. Well, that's magical. So at some point, the first stage should separate. You can see they have lost control. The first stage is rotating in a manner that does not look like it's a controlled descent, and then boom. Okay, so RUD, big explosion, big fire. And this was more than 3.5 minutes into the flight at an altitude of about 90 kilometers over the... As Super Heavy was experiencing these problems, the 6 Raptor engines on the Starship upper stage were burning nominally and pushing the vehicle along a flight path intended to take it nearly 2/3 of the way around Earth before splashing down near Hawaii. However, 7 minutes after liftoff, a large vent of liquid oxygen occurred. There was excess liquid oxygen in the vehicle, SpaceX said, to gather data representative of future payload deployment missions. It needed to be released before Starship splashed down. So instead of having a bunch of payloads on board, which take years to develop, this is a tester mission. They're just going to do a mass dummy replacement of those payloads with some liquid oxygen, it sounds like. I'm surprised there weren't simpler options or less, like not using liquid oxygen, but just having actual mass dummies on the flight. But there are connection considerations and then complexities and maybe it was just easier for them to have a larger tank, or maybe they didn't need to change the tank diameter at all and they just filled it up to the brim. A leak in the aft section of the spacecraft that developed when the liquid oxygen vent was initiated resulted in a combustion event and subsequent fires that led to lost communication between flight computers. The SpaceX uses a triple mode redundancy system, so 3 computers need to come to the agree on a result if they're going to take action. If you have a breakdown in communication between those computers, the state machines on board will be unable to move to the next result, and most likely your mission is over by that point. The vehicle had reached an altitude of about 150 kilometers, so the second stage got to about 150, and it was running at about 24,000 kilometers per hour. 24,000, how many miles per hour? 2 meters per second. So 6,666 meters per second. I hope none of you are superstitious. This takes us into the next article, which is related to the FAA and the announcement that they will be providing Starship license to launch, I believe, mid-March. Starship has had a tough time getting regulatory approval. It needs to show the FAA that it understands that the explosion that we just witnessed happened. So this talks about how they are launching a new committee to evaluate the launch regulations. I'm not sure that'll be faster. That might actually be slower. You're adding committees on top of committees. TBD. Part 450 was developed very quickly, and we are all learning together as we go along, says Kevin Coleman, the space chief at the FAA. He highlighted areas where the committee will focus, including how to approach licensing for reentry and hybrid vehicles, as well as developing an alternative licensing process for vehicles still in the test phase. So it does make sense once you have a vehicle that works really, really well, like the Falcon 9. I believe it has a 98.5% success rate. You can probably push licenses through to those kinds of rockets very quickly, and then for these vehicles that are more in test phase, be a little more scrupulous with what you're offering them, the times, the places. There's also the consideration that there are going to be multiple launch companies operating. You have Alpha, the Alpha Firefly, you have the Rocket Lab Electron rockets, you obviously have SpaceX. Blue Origin might be buying out the United Launch Alliance. So all of these companies are going to be competing for space-time, and that will further complicate the process of giving out licenses. So doing this faster, not going to be easy, but should definitely be attempted, because it's, I'm sure Starship, I believe they have 4 currently in line, almost ready to go. So they want to start launching these things as soon as possible. And it's been months since the Starship explosion, 4 months to be exact, where they have not been given a license to launch again. In 2021, the FAA combined 4 separate regulations into a new Part 450 that lays out the framework for issuing licenses for launch and re-entry missions, evaluating public safety risks and approving operations that will not pose a risk to the general public. Legacy licenses will need to be in compliance with the new rules by March 2026. Sounds good. They licensed a record 124 operations in space in 2023. 98 of those launches were SpaceX Falcon 9. You could see just how dominant they are in the industry, that small slice of pie that's left was all of their competitors. Maybe Boeing's Starliner will finally fly astronauts this spring. The first launch of astronauts on Boeing's Starliner capsule is targeted for April 2022. Boeing's Starliner crew module for the upcoming crew test flight was mated with the spacecraft service module last year. This on the bottom is a heat shield. On the top is the command pod. It will fit, I believe, 4 astronauts. Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams will fly it to a docking with the space station and then return to Earth, lasting roughly 10 days of flight. That's a hell of a vacation. Some of us go to Morocco, some of us go to India, and some of us go to the International Space Station. Boeing appears to be a couple of months from finally launching astronauts into orbit aboard the commercial CST-100 Starliner crew capsule. It was about 2 months prior to this mission's previous launch, last July, when Boeing and NASA decided to put a hold on launch preps. They were launching last July, so almost a full year ago. This is because during their final review, Starliner, it's had a couple of technical issues, to be exact. One was that it had a kilometer of flammable tape wrapped around wiring bundles that all had to be replaced. Could you imagine going through a kilometer of wiring harnesses and replacing all of the tape? That's a lot of work, and that's a lot of extra money. What was that second issue? The flammable tape is known as P213. They just wrapped tape that wasn't flammable on top of the tape that was flammable. What was the other issue? We needed one test with a new upgraded system. We changed joints on the suspension lines, strengthened the main canopies. There are 24 of these fabric soft links on each Starliner spacecraft, with 8 on each of the capsule's 3 main parachutes. So it looks like their other problem was related to the parachute system. The soft links are part of the network of lines connecting each parachute canopy to the spacecraft. During the final safety reviews, they discovered that those connections were more prone to failure, especially in situations where one of the spacecraft's 3 main chutes didn't deploy. And their fundamental safety requirement is that it can land with at least 2 of the 3 chutes. So fixing those soft links, problem 2. During this test, they dropped a weight that was a mass dummy for the Starliner spacecraft from a C-130 cargo plane over an Army facility in Arizona. That's so cool. Engineers purposely used only 2 chutes to simulate the additional stress the system would see during an extreme case. Here is the NASA astronaut Butch Wilmore. He was the commander of the first Starliner crew flight. Maybe not. Here's a nice picture of the 2 parachute test with the mass dummy down here. This is I assume the actual nose cone for the Starliner itself. A couple of tidbits of interesting information down here. So NASA awarded fixed price contracts to Boeing and SpaceX in 2014 to develop and bring Starliner and Crew Dragon into service. There was the Crew Dragon from SpaceX and the Starliner from Boeing. Boeing got $4.2 billion and SpaceX got $2.6 billion. Just pocket change. To be fair, SpaceX has also made some mistakes. One of its Dragon capsules exploded during a ground test in 2019, but they were able to launch astronauts a little more than a year later. Crew Dragon has made multiple missions now to the ISS. So it's currently on its 8th operational Crew Dragon flight. That's fantastic. Congratulations to SpaceX for being reliable. I haven't heard any misery so far, no dead astronauts, which is the Starliner delays have jeopardized Boeing's ability to build a market for Starliner. That makes sense. Any other pieces of information interesting? Here's a photo of the United Launch Alliance technicians installing the first stage of an Atlas V rocket. So the Starliner will be launching off of a United Launch Alliance rocket, giving them some traffic and not just pushing all of the business SpaceX's way. The spacecraft is in really good shape, not much work left to go. We're going to wrap up that article and move on to, last but not least, Space Force to lean on private sector for space tracking data. Here's a picture of Lieutenant General Miller, head of Space Operations Command. As U.S. Space Force continues to refine its plan to leverage commercial services, a top general says he expects space domain awareness to be one where the private sector capabilities will be increasingly needed. With more congestions and threats, Space Force needs better space tracking data and analytics capabilities. that can transform raw data into actionable intelligence. So we've talked about this a few times on the show. The military is essentially going for real-time global coverage. It won't just be the US, it'll be everyone that can possibly put this kind of infrastructure in place. And the idea is to have your drones, your spacecraft, all feeding, whether it be Earth observation, whether it be radio, all feeding information into one system with artificial intelligence, picking out the useful pieces of information, linking it, doing some like geo-coordination, timing, making sure, and packaging that information such that it can be viewed at any point. So if we want to see what's going on in a battlefield in, let's say, northern Canada, we just tell the computer, listen, I want to know what's going on in this square kilometer region. And it will show you, okay, well, from this satellite and from this drone and from this ship, this is the information that we are currently picking up. Now you're able to make a very well-informed real-time decision of what to do with your capabilities and assets. Based at Peterson Space Force Base, Colorado, the Space Operations Command is responsible for training and field combat-ready forces. Colorado actually has a surprising number of space companies there. I couldn't list all of them for you, but I know that there are offices for companies, a lot of satellite companies like Blue Canyon. Loft has a Colorado office. There are a bunch of others. But you imagine, California, Silicon Valley. You imagine Texas now with all of its space companies. But then, Colorado is right there, where they can provide operational utility, mission resilience, rapid reconstitution, and backstopping for core capability. I'm all in. There's also an interesting conversation to be had about not just Earth information gathering, but cislunar, so the space between the moon and Earth, and obviously even lunar observations. For example, the US military has a craft called the LRO, the Lunar Reconnaissance, I forget what the O stands for, that's orbiting around the moon and constantly taking photos. The intention of that craft was not only to assist with monitoring their assets on the moon, but also to monitor the assets of other countries to just know what's going on. Lots of intelligence, that's the main weapon of the future. Space domain awareness refers to the ability to detect, track, and identify objects in orbit, as well as monitor space weather and other activity that could impact operations. Well, that's a really good point. You can also monitor weather, which is extremely important for many things. It's considered crucial for things like warning of potential collisions with satellites or spotting potential adversary threats. There are constellations in space that track hypersonic missiles. We did an episode on that earlier. There are going to be satellites that they're not just looking at the Earth, but also looking at other satellites in space, tracking them. There is a push also towards creating spacecraft that are able to propulse themselves towards another spacecraft and to perform either dismantling maneuvers or to grab it and push it into another orbit. There are a lot of good commercial reasons that you would want something like this, kind of a space tug feature. But there are obviously a lot of military reasons to be able to track other satellites in space in case you do want to go over and perform some actions on them. Miller said that the commercial strategy has been a really collaborative process, and Space Operations Command provided input. The document, which examines how Space Force could partner with commercial space industry, is being coordinated with Pentagon space policy. The demand for space power is only increasing. It's not decreasing. I'm going to leave you there. This has been Space News, day 29, I believe. I'm losing track of it now. My name's Mike. Thank you so much for sticking around. Smash that like button, and we will see each other tomorrow.